a little under 72 hours ago.
That could end up being as consequential as GPT-4.
Now, I know you were thinking,
But let's see if you agree with it. I will explain as best as I can.
revelations in the last 24 hours from Apple, Amazon Britain,
And Baidu make it particularly significant. The model was Stanford's Alpaca.
and here is the key line. Alpaca behaves qualitatively similarly to OpenAI's text.
DaVinci 3, while being surprisingly small, and easy and cheap to reproduce, at under $600. Now that is cool. First, it wasn't supposed to get this cheap this fast. Just 6 weeks ago.
Or 5 weeks before they released the model, ARK Investment Management put out this prediction that the 2020 cost of GPT-3 at $4.6 million
Would take until 2030.
fall to something as insignificant as $30. If Stanford have done what they claim, then 99% of this cost reduction has happened.
Within 5 weeks of this prediction being published.
Not 8 years.
As our researcher, Eliza Udowski puts it.
I don't think people realize what a big deal it is that Stanford retrained a llama model by cheaply fine-tuning it. Now I'm gonna explain all of this in a moment.
I'm not sure I can convey how much. This is a brand new idiom of AI as a technology.
Now Stanford claimed their model performs comparably,
Which is GPT 3.5 of course.
but how could it be that a $600 model can compete with ChatGPT? Well, do you remember? About 2 weeks ago, Stanford used the weakest of these open source models, the 7 billion parameter one, and then essentially
To train that meta model. How could they possibly do this? Well, they used self-instruct.
and I dug into the literature to find the original paper on self-instruct.
This was released in December of last year, and I'm gonna give you the 30-second summary. Essentially,
Of exemplar prompts and outputs.
these are fed into the language model.
Thousands more such instances.
You filter out the bad ones. Back into the language model. And produces thousands more examples.
This is almost human, annotation-free. And remember this stat.
Instruct GPT. What is Instruct GPT?
Well, it's the breakthrough that led to Chat
GPT in the first place.
If you gave a prompt like,
In a few sentences.
after months of onerous human training, called reinforcement learning,
It was able to follow instructions much better.
but this relied on so much human labeling and human ranking of outputs from best to worst, Stanford and the self-instruct breakthrough.
So in summary, and got GPT 3.5 to train it.
One advanced model. As Yurtkovsky points out, that they can stare at other models
And imitate them. Indeed, Opena.
in their terms of service.
Use output from the services,
like ChatGPT, to develop models that compete with OpenAI, so they knew it was possible. That this breakthrough enables more people to create new. Yurtkovsky also points out that
GPT and GPT-4 is that they rest on proprietary data, and that was supposed to give them a, which is now revealed.
people can quite cheaply steal. Just before I test, let me summarize how it works. You get GPT
Similar to ChatGPT.
and thousands
50 to 1,000 instruction.
automatically. Stanford then used an open source model
And trained it.
using those examples.
The end result, Alpaca.
So let's see in action. To ChatGPT. Oh, and just quickly,
Training of
the llama model.
2,000 examples
and cost less than $100.
The first example
Does not come from me. I found it in this,
linked in the description.
which requires and dissonant scenarios,
Applying program and choosing the correct answer. Is B Alpaca,
gets this question right
or I should say,
about 80% of the time. And sometimes,
but about 80% of the time, you get the correct answer B.
well, every time.
It's gotten. And GPT-4, shocking even to me.
And pick C,
Now, before you get too excited,
that it is better than, or even as good as.
pint it's not,
But remember, billion parameters.
and $600 worth.
Take this example of an animal.
That begins with the same letter.
City of France.
No idea where it got that.
Now, in fairness,
And GPT-4.
but there are other questions.
Definitely flops. For example, which ChatGPT?
Uniformly get right.
Alpaca simply.
I tried asking it.
With chain of thought prompting.
It gets it wrong.
It's definitely.
But by the end of the video, it's revolutionary.
If you're learning anything,
Or a comment.
basic edition, it is better.
And yes, it can solve some hella swag, common sense problems,
Literary analogies.
but at this point, three things.
First, that it was using the weakest of the llama. They could have used parameter model.
I'm sure the results would have been even.
Next, you remember, by examples, the Da Vinci. Well, that cost them about.
$3. But as of 40,
They could have used.
API at a very similar cost. So it wasn't the best open.
And it wasn't trained.
I'm genuinely curious. If it had been trained 5 billion using a GPT for API,
Maybe someone's gonna do that.
but just before,
Apple, Amazon.
Britain and Baidu,
This was all done for.
dollars or less.
They even say,
They could have done.
using the age. That would have further. The question is,
And cheap to imitate a larger model.
what's going to happen? They're large. It was only in the New York Times.
Working on one.
And don't forget,
Than the other companies mentioned.
Amazon recently stated, Tech checked for a long time and looking,
As early as
they had a model that outperformed. As you may already know, their Ernie bot,
today, although
anyone else too. It's better in the Chinese language,
than even GPT-4, but because release a paper.
and we can't check it. And of course,
Google, we just announced the Palm API.
what would have happened?
Had used that one. I'm sure we will soon.
To take us back, I have one overriding observation. First, these models weren't supposed this fast that the economics
And my questions are these.
that all incentive Microsoft or Google producing these.
If anyone can reproduce them,
Will they react even more closed?
and it is allowing GPT,
We don't know. Nation states enter this quote,
unquote, arms race.
spending hundreds. In this case,
Are these companies
drifting into a war where they compete,
but also with outsiders?
imitate their models.
If you've learned anything, please do leave a like.
But either way,